Hi, everybody. So I wanted to share a part of my faith story with you today. It was one of those kind of big aha moments for me. And so it centers around my time in Lutheran Volunteer Corps, or LVC. LVC is a program of the ELCA, and it invites participants into a year of service. So volunteers work full-time at a nonprofit organization, and usually it has a social justice focus. They live in community with other volunteers and receive a small living stipend. During this year, volunteers attempt to uphold LVC's 3 core spiritual practices of intentional community, working for peace with justice, and living simply and sustainably. And they try to uphold these at work as well as in the community and in their homes. So during my year in LVC, I worked at a high school in Southeast Washington, D.C., and it's an area known for really extreme crime and poverty. And my job was to provide after-school programming for students so they had a safe place to be and fun things to do. I lived with 5 other volunteers, and they had jobs all over the city doing all different things. So one worked with adults with disabilities, one worked with women recovering from addiction and homelessness, one helped faith communities to advocate for the environment, one worked in campus ministry, and one led clubs for girls, teaching them to love their bodies and to love themselves. As I worked and lived in community with these incredible people, I began to discover something that had been missing, a way to live my life that fit with and really acted out my faith. I grew up going to church and Sunday school, and I even went to a Lutheran college, but I never felt like my life matched what I was learning in those spaces. I would hear Bible stories of incredible sacrificial acts of love, or disciples giving up everything to go and do God's work, but I didn't see that in my life or the lives around me. I would find myself questioning if this was really it, if this was what Christian life just looked like today. I wondered if maybe the Bible stories were out of date or extraordinary, but all the while I was feeling a tug that there just had to be more, and there had to be more to living a life in response to God's love. What I found in LVC were people who had taken this love and turned it into lives of service in every way, not just in the jobs they did working for others, supporting them and lifting them up, helping them to succeed, or championing for better treatment for women and youth and God's creation. Their service didn't stop when their work days ended. It continued into our home and into the ways we loved and cared for our community. Living with and learning from these people, slowly but surely, my life began to feel more and more like the idea that had tugged at me all those years. I spent fewer and fewer nights watching TV alone in my room after work or after dinner, and more nights simply sitting in our kitchen or our living room. And I talked with my housemates. I learned about them and their work. I began to change the ways I talked about things to use more welcoming and intentional words. I began to change my basic routines. I learned to compost my tea bag every morning, to use less water, and to create less waste. I traded sitting around relaxing for accompanying my friends on long walks or errands across the city, or a quest for perfectly ripe peaches. TV time turned into game nights or craft nights, or caring for our community garden plot. And my weekend naps gave way to cooking good food to support us in our work week, or watching the Baltimore Ravens play football so my housemate didn't have to yell at the TV by herself. And that's a favor she returned for me when the Badgers made it to the Final Four that March. Even the articles I read on Facebook changed from things that looked cool or funny to stories that I knew mattered to my housemates or to the students I was working with. News I knew that they would be excited to hear and want someone to talk about with it. My life became less and less full with things I did just for me or just for fun, and more full of space to be with others, to walk alongside them and to support them. There became time in my day and in my life for relationship with others. I left space, and instead of feeling guilty or worried that that time wasn't planned, I found it joyfully filled time and time again by talking with neighbors or students, doing projects with my housemates, and just spending time in genuine community in relationship with others. Toward the end of the year, I was at a work event when a former volunteer asked a group of us what the takeaway from our year with LVC was. Without giving it much thought, I answered, "It's really hard. It's so much work to live my life this way, but I feel so at peace with the way I'm living my life." He smiled and he clinked my glass and he said, "That's it. You've got it. That's the whole thing. That's the point." Without even realizing it, I'd found myself with a Christian community and life I had always really wondered about. One of loving sacrifice, where everything is done with care for others and the world around us, where the guiding question is not, what can I get out of this, but what can this give? Where the needs of others were seen as equally important as my own, where the hard work and sacrifice of these choices and of this way of living weren't deterrents, but instead they were celebrated and really supported in our community. It was hard, but it was really good, and that was what mattered. A few years after I finished LVC, I came across a devotional from a Christian artist named Allie, and I find myself returning to it often when the peace and simplicity of the way I learned to live in LVC feels far away from my life in the moment. It reads, "What if our big goals aren't the culmination of our to-do lists, rather a vision of what our life looks like, who we are, where we are, how we are spending our time? I think that the next step is taking inventory of how we are currently spending our time. Are there things we are involved in now that are keeping us from being the person and living the lives we envision? I love the idea of taking something away so that we can add more, the right more later. Doing less now so we can do more later. Take inventory of who and what is taking your time, and then take a step back. What needs to go? Then let it go. Let's make space for really great things." Would you pray with me, please? Dear God, I thank you so much for the love you give us and for the way it works in our hearts, and for all the opportunities we have to let that love shine in our lives and in the way we live them out. Help us to declutter our lives and to make room for you in whatever way that looks like, in whatever way you see fit, that we could be available and just walk through this world in a way that lets us share your incredible love. In your name we pray. Amen. Thank you.